Fantastic. Here we are. I can't believe we have reached the beginning of the Torah once again. I feel like we probably didn't do the Torah justice this time around. Unfortunately, missed a lot of public readings of Torah, and then therefore, obviously, a lot of opportunities to share insights and to learn about the Torah. So we got to do the best that we can and start anew, and it's a great opportunity to just begin to learn something. And as I said in the little blurb that I sent out, my intention in this Parsha Shir is to share an idea that I haven't shared in the past, or I should say more specifically, that I haven't learned in the past. Obviously, if I haven't learned in the past, I haven't shared in the past either. So that's my hope, is to kind of, for me to take upon sometimes rabbis, when we're time poor, we're just like, all right, like go back to 1996 and find a shir we gave, and like, great, it works. We can fit it into the COVID thing somehow, right? But let's learn the Torah, right? Let's learn the Torah with fresh eyes, with new eyes, and try to see new things. And I thought to look more at the Meforshim, at the commentaries on the Torah, and some of the Meforshim that we don't touch too often. And so the one we're going to do tonight is one that we do look at more often than others. So it'll be a name that will be more familiar to many of you. But yet this, which is one of his opening Perushim, opening commentaries on the Torah, is not one that I was familiar with, and I thought it's a powerful idea to share with you. Okay, so that's what we're going to do this evening, and then on these Thursday nights on with Parsha Shir, we're going to learn some Meforshim together, and we're going to delve into and try to find things that we haven't seen before. Because, as I mentioned, the Torah is an infinite sea, right? And it's important that we don't keep on just kind of rehashing ideas that work for us. They work. There's nothing wrong with that. But we also need to go deeper and delve into the Torah to the best of our abilities. So I'm going to share my screen with you here for a moment. What I'll do as well, for those who wish, is I'm going to just put in the chat, I'll put the link. So if you want to look at, one second, if you want to look at the sources on your own time, in a sense, right? So you don't want to trust me, you want to move ahead and see whether or not you should stick around for the whole shir, you can do that. So that's in the chat if you want. But I will also share my screen for the rest of you. Let's do this. Cool. Beautiful. Okay, so what we're going to learn is from the Kli Yakar. So the Kli Yakar is a commentary that I have shared with you in the past. It's he's one of the more well-known Perushim, but again, not everyone learns him with, he can be challenging at times, but some of his Perushim, some of his commentaries are just so brilliant, so powerful, and I thought that this one that I came across, which is just at the beginning, I didn't have to go too far, I thought was really, really meaningful, and hopefully also be able to give me deeper insight into this Perush. So just a little bit, I just stole this off of Wikipedia. The Kli Yakar was Rav Shlomo Ephraim ben Aaron Lunshitz. He was a rabbi and Torah commentator, and he served as the rabbi of Prague from 1604 to 1619, at which point he passed away. So he is one of the, if you open up a Mikraot Gedolot, which is the compendium of the major Meforshim, the Kli Yakar is one of the ones that are featured there. So we're not talking about someone who's just kind of like relegated to the back. He is a major Perush, and it's a wonderful opportunity to learn some of his words. So what the Kli Yakar is interested in is a question that many Meforshim are interested in. Many people, Rashi from the beginning also, why does the book of the Torah open up Bereishit bara Elokim? Why is it written in that weird way, right? It could have been written differently. And so we're going to be, we've got as you can see here, we've got a fair bit of text that we're going to try to work through today. So this will be a little bit more of a text-based shiur. In future weeks, we might have ones that are more, kind of just ideas, but we're going to look a little bit of text together. If there's anything that's not clear, or if you have any questions or insights or comments, please feel free to just interrupt whenever you want, or you can raise your hand if you feel like it. Okay, so let's just let the text do the talking. Enough of me. So again, this is Kli Akar al Bereishit, and it's from the first perek, so Aleph, Bet. So meaning it's the first perek, the first pasuk, the first chapter, the first verse, but it's the second of his comments on that first chapter, the first pasuk. Bereishit bara Elokim. In the beginning, created God, or God created. Min hara'ui haya lehatchila Torah b'shem Elokim. Right? It would have been fitting to begin the Torah with the name of God. It should have said Elokim bara Bereishit. God created the beginning, right? Shouldn't it make sense that if, the whole book's about God, shouldn't it start off with God? Why does it do Bereishit, the beginning, Elokim created? Okay, everyone understand the question? It's a very kind of well-known question that's asked, right? Ad shehutzrachu rabotenu zichronam livracha, to such an extent, so much so that the sages of blessed memory, ad shehutzrachu razal lishanot letalmei hamelech v'lichtov Elokim bara Bereishit. There's a famous story in which Ptolemy, the king, the Greek king, brought in all the rabbis and he put them all in separate rooms. And he made them translate the Torah, right? It's a very dark day in Jewish history. But there was a miracle that happened, right? Ptolemy was looking to catch these Jews and mess them up and see how they, they don't understand anything. But a miracle happened, and they all, each and every one of these translations, what was it, 70 translations, each of them was exactly the same. And they all changed in their translation of the Torah into Greek. They all began by saying, they translated as Elokim bara Bereishit. So we see that these rabbis, in order to fend off misunderstanding, they all changed it to Elokim bara Bereishit, that God created the beginning. But how come the Torah doesn't do that, right? How come the Torah doesn't do that? I mean, so much so, I shouldn't even mention such things, but I think it was L. Ron Hubbard, that guy who created, what was that, what's that thing, the Scientology, right? Scientology, they believe that Bereishit, bara Elokim, that Elokim are these aliens, Rahman al-Itzlan, right? Like an awful idea that Elokim, that in the beginning, they created Elokim, these aliens, right? So there's something really confusing about the way in which the Torah is written. Why is that, okay? And so this is our question, and this is what we're going to look at. Ve'al zeh nitnu hamefarshim tam l'shevach. So it was for this reason that the commentaries have given a reason that is praiseworthy, meaning there is a reason behind this, obviously, and it's a good reason. Lefi shemitziut Hashem mitbarach, efshar lahasig ki im mitzad darachav upeulotav umasei yadav asher bara, hema yagidun yitnu edut ne'amana al mitziuto yitbarach. So why does the Torah write it like this? Because, I'll just read the English so it's clear for everybody, since the existence of God, may he be praised, is impossible to fathom except through his attributes, his acts, and the works of his hands that he created. They are the ones that testify, speak, and give faithful testimony about his blessed existence. I'll explain. Lekach, therefore, nakat tchila Bereishit bara, ve'achar kach noda Elokim. So therefore, because a person can only come to understand God through God's actions, which is what the Torah talks about, therefore it says, Bereishit bara, in the beginning created, ve'achar kach nod. And after you understand the beginning and the creation, then you can understand Elohim. So the Kli Yakar is explaining the reason why it says Bereishit bara Elohim is because you can't understand God without first, we can't understand God in totality at all, but even an attempt to understand God cannot be done without first beginning God's attributes, his acts, and the works of his hands, the things that he created, which are represented by Bereishit bara. Okay, so that's our first step here, where the Kli Yakar brings an answer that's not his own, but he references this idea that the reason why there's this strange phrasing and that Elohim, God, is the third word, this is to come to understand that first we know God through God's creation, Bereishit, bara, the creation, and then we can understand God. Okay, I'm going to stop here to see if we have any questions or if you have any thoughts or how are we going. Give me some thumbs up, some thumbs down. Okay, cool. All right, so hopefully we're all on the same page. Everyone's comfortable with what we've learned so far. Let's go deeper. So he says, Vikashe. Here we are in the Hebrew, we are Vikashe, and in the English, we are here, but there is a difficulty about this. Vikashe al zeh. This is difficulty. Tahava le michtav bara Elokim Bereishit. What should it have said? If, according to the Kli Yakar, the answer that he gave is that, okay, the reason why it doesn't say God's name first is because we have to first know God's creation and then we can know God's name. Why then doesn't it say bara Elokim Bereishit? That would grammatically work as well, just as well. Why does it say bara Elokim Bereishit? Why doesn't it say, bara Elokim Bereishit? Ki kol ma sheyachol la'akdim Hashem hadin noten la'akdimo. Right? Because it's logical that anything that the name of God could precede, it should precede. Meaning, if we've got the name of God, we should put it as early as possible. So fine, we're not going to do it as the first word of the Torah because you have to understand God first through God's creation. But do it as the second one. Yeah? Everyone understand that? Yeah? Okay. No one's raising their voice at me, so that's fine. שהרי אין מציאות השם תלוי בידיעת הדברים המוקדמים ביצירה, אשר על זה מורה מילת בראשית לדעת רוב המפרשים. Why is this? Because the existence of God is not dependent upon the knowledge of the earlier things in creation about which the word Bereishit relates to. The Bereishit could have been held off because in order to know God, we don't have to know about Bereishit. We don't have to know about the earlier things that happened in creation as part of the creation. There's a God. So we have bara Elokim Bereishit. Elokim created Bereishit, but why do we have Bereishit bara Elokim? Why in that order? So the Kli Yakar doesn't understand why Elokim isn't the second word, is not the second word. Okay, let's see how he answers that. Any questions as we go? No. Okay, he's going to go add another difficulty here. V'od. And furthermore, excuse me, Shibal HaKedah, that the writer of the Akedah, who's called Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, Samach Perush Zeh al Midrash HaOmer Anvnotecha. What's the pasuk? 1 second. I have to see how we translate that. Tehillim Yudchet. Should we make this public? Sure, let's make this public. Let's just look up how we translate that word, unless anybody knows how to read it. Thank you. So it says Yudchet Lamed Vav. So v'titein li magen yishecha v'mincha tisadein. This is from Tehillim, from chapter 18 Tehillim. You have given me the shield of your protection. Your right hand has sustained me. V'mincha tisadeini. V'an vatacha tarbeni. And your care, an vatacha tarbeni, has made me great. But here, we're obviously, it says here your care, which is probably from one of the commentaries, but an vatacha is obviously your modesty, your humility, okay? So we're going to see there's there's something about your humility makes me great. Okay, your humility enlarges me. How do we understand that? So this is the Rabbi Yitzchak Arama. He brings this midrash to explain the following thing: Melech basar vadam mazkir shemo techila ve'achar kach ma'asav. A king of flesh and blood mentions his name first, and afterwards his acts. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu mishehizkir ma'asav hu mazkir shemo. But the Holy One, blessed be He, mentioned His name after He mentioned His acts, right? We have Bereishit bara, in the beginning was created, Elokim, or God created, but Elokim only comes later. V'yesh litbonein mahu an v'tanuto. We have to come to understand what is God's humility, bazer. How is God humble here? What's humble about God? By writing His name after His acts. Umahu zeh she'amar tarbeni, bameh hirba v'higdil otanu. And when the pasuk says, "And your humility has made me great," how has God's humility made us great? What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay, so the Kli Yakar asks, let's just review so we don't lose everyone here. The Kli Yakar asks, why is the Torah written Bereishit bara Elokim? It could have said, it should have said Elokim first, but then he says, no, it should be bara, because we can first understand God through His creation, and then Elokim. But he says, okay, that's his question. And then he says, there's another question by the Kli Yakar. How is this act of God holding His name back? How is that an element of God's humility? We can understand that, but how does it make us great? So now he's going to explain this idea. Questions, comments before we continue? Okay, I hope we're all just kind of taking it in. Ve'akarov elai lomar, ki Rashi ratza letaken kol zeh b'ma she'amar, ein hamikra omer ela dorsheni. It appears to me that this is to say that, and what appears most likely to me is to say that Rashi wanted to fix all of this when he said that this text says nothing if not interpret me. Meaning Rashi looks at these words as well, Bereishit bara Elokim, very strange, very cryptic. Why does it have to be? So Rashi says the only reason why it says this is because it's coming to teach us something. It's becoming to teach us something. What is it coming to teach us? Bishvil haTorah v'Yisrael shenikra'u Reishit. Meaning, why does the Torah say begin with Bereishit? Because it's referencing the Torah, which is called the Reishit, the first thing, and Yisrael, which is also called Reishit. Ritzono lamar, meaning to say, lefi she'i efshar lehakir mitziut or mitziat Hashem yitbarach ki im al yedei haTorah v'Yisrael. Let me just explain, just so in case we're not lost. Rashi, I could have brought the text for Rashi here, but we'll just have to do it from outside. Rashi, when he looks at this cryptic verse, it says, Bereishit bara Elokim, Rashi brings the midrash and he says, why does it begin with the word Bereishit? Because it must mean that the whole creation did not happen except for the sake of the Torah, which is called Reishit, the first, and then he brings a pasuk to prove that, and for the sake of the Jewish people, who are also called Reishit, the first. We are the first of what God chose. So Rashi there comes to say, similar to what the Kli Yakar was kind of mentioning before, but he says it's impossible to know God. Now this might be, let me know if you think this is controversial. Let me know if you agree with this. It is impossible to know God without the Torah and without Yisrael, without the Jewish people. Let's do a little bit more, and then I want to open this up with a question here. Al Kain Nikra'u Reshit. Therefore, it's called Reshit. They're called, both of them are called Reshit, right? Israel and Am Yisrael and the Torah. Kishem hakdama lavo adam lidei hakarat mitziut Hashem yitbarach. Because both of them, both the Torah and the Jewish people, are an introduction through which one comes to the knowledge of God's existence. Ki haTorah, let's finish this thing and then we'll kind of unpack, because I imagine there's a lot of stuff to discuss here. Ki haTorah mifarsemet emunat hachidush ve'elo kuto yitbarach. Because the Torah publicizes faith in his creation and divinity. May he be blessed. May his name be blessed. V'Yisrael gam hu yada lefarsem mitzvot Hashem yitbarach mitzad haKabbalah. And the Jewish people also, they knew how to publicize the existence of God, may he be blessed, from the angle of transmission that they received. The fact we're not talking here about the Kabbalah, about the mystical secrets, but the fact that we got passed down this transmission, this Kabbalah, this tradition as to how to understand the nature, that we understand that through Am Yisrael, through understanding Am Yisrael. Ish mipi ish, person to person, passing it down. Ad Adam Harishon, Sharat Haolam Charav. Sorry, 1 second. Ubanui, right? V'hu eid ne'eman b'chidush olam. Right? Basically, it was passed down from generation to generation, back to Adam, who saw the world destroyed and built, and is a faithful witness to the creation of the world, which is a sign, an indication of its creator. And this transmission was spread by the offspring of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yisrael and Yaakov. So meaning, it's what the Kli Yakar says is that it is impossible to come to understand God without understanding the Reshit. Right? Because if you remember, let's just take it back a step. The reason why he is saying that the Torah needs to start Bereishit bara Elokim, and not just bara Elokim Bereishit, is because he's saying there's something essential about this Reshit, that Bereishit, God created. What's the Bereishit? The Torah and the Jewish people. And without the Torah and without the Jewish people, you could not come to know God, and so therefore it needs to say Bereishit, bara, and then Elokim. And that's why, according to him, and we'll unpack this a little bit more, I'm going to pause here for now, but that's why it says Bereishit bara Elokim, because we need this Reshit. In order to understand God, you need to look at God's physical creation, which is, of course, represented by the word bara, but so too you also need to understand it through the lens of the Jewish people and the Torah, which is referenced by the word Bereishit. I'm going to pause here and see how we're going. I mean, do we agree with this idea that you can only come to understand God through the Torah, through Am Yisrael? Yes, Roz.
I've got a question. We are told in commentaries on Yitro that God came to the various people and asked them if they wanted the Torah. And Israel was the only one who accepted it wholeheartedly. That's so how, and obviously Rashi and whoever are people who had that knowledge and were basing their interpretations on that premise. But if that is what we believe, then this doesn't make sense, because we didn't actually accept the Torah until it came to Mount Sinai.
It's a great question, Roz. And I think that maybe this is a really good opportunity to, first off, I'll say it like this. Okay. This is a good opportunity to explore the idea that there are conflicting midrashim, right? There are midrashic interpretations of the Torah that can conflict, and it doesn't make one right and the other wrong, but rather they each see things from a different viewpoint. This idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God came to the other nations before he came to the Jewish people, is a midrash. And it's a really good one. And it's a really famous one, and everybody knows it. But that doesn't mean that it's not, nowhere is that written in the Torah. It's not specifically written. It gives layers of depth and meaning and understanding to the Torah. And it very well may be true, but it doesn't have to necessarily be true. And so just because this particular, by the way, let me finish this statement. Just because this one doesn't take that midrash doesn't mean that the other, that midrashic opinion doesn't mean that the other one is not true. They just approach it from different perspectives. With that being said, it's possible that someone would have a really good answer to that question as to why is it that on one hand God did go to the other people, but the Jewish people nonetheless are still called Bereishit, and God still knew that the Jewish people were the ones who are going to accept the Torah and bring the Torah to reality.
That's without doubt.
Yeah.
And that, that they are, his segula.
Yeah.
His segula.
Yeah.
But,
no, it's a good question that you ask, but I think it's also important to understand that sometimes these things that we accept as fact, in a sense, are midrashim, which again are so essential for understanding of the Torah. And when I say it's a midrash, I don't say that lightly. It's an important thing, but it doesn't. What it means is it's not necessarily the only version of truth. I think Lauren had her hand raised, and Rotem, or Lauren, not anymore. Rotem.
Thanks, Rabbi. Maybe I interpret the clear car and the is bringing of Rashi slightly differently.
Great. You want me to share the screen?
Sorry?
Do you want me to share the screen, or you want?
No, it's fine. I got it offline.
Cool.
But I think the first thing you ought to know is that there is a God. Before you try to understand God, you ought to know that there is a God. How do you know that? Obviously, through his Jewish people who pass it hand to mouth, eat to mouth, eat to mouth, eat to mouth. If you trace it all back, those are the two testaments that there is a God. Now, once you know there's a God, then the question is, how do you perceive and relate to God? And that's through his creation. And that's the first point that he brought. So there seems to be a bit of in the clear kind of Rashi interpretation, a bit of a logic there that says, first know there is a God, then relate to the God through his creation, and then you understand there is what the concept of God is. So that's how I interpret it.
I agree with that, but I think the point that I'm trying to pick up on is his question. He's saying if the idea is to know God, you have to see God through his creation. And I think it'll become clear in a moment when he begins to explain to us in the next section, what does this mean to know God, right? Like, what does Elohim represent? But at least the way I'm understanding, and I think there's these two levels in a sense. There's bara. There's bara, which is, there's God, and you understand God through his creation. And then there's another level of Bereishit, which is, of course, the opening, right? Which is Am Yisrael, which is Torah. So you're seeing that as separate stages?
No, maybe not as deep as that. All I'm saying is that in order to appreciate and understand God, first you need to know there is a God. How do you know there's even a concept of a God before you try to understand that concept?
Right.
How do you know that?
I hear that.
You're saying through the concept of Torah, which is called Bereishit. Israel, that would call Bereishit. Israel passed it mouth to ear. So you trace that back. So now you know there is a God. And the Torah is the written word that testifies that there is a God. So that's how you know the first part. And then the second part is, how do you, once you understand there is a concept of a God, how do you relate to that God? Through his creation. So there's an order here, and that's why Bereishit first, then bara, and then you get to the concept of God.
Nice, good, beautiful, very, very clear and succinct. I like the way you've approached it. Now, I guess the question is, and as we have a bit more text to do together, my question is that the way that we come to understand God? Is it possible to understand God through other means? Are you just taking it as face value? What do you think? Is it possible to know God at all? I mean, what do you think? Can we know God? I'm going to make a bracha while people are thinking. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'dvaro.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let's go on in the text because it gets quite deeper, and I have some other more sources to share with you as well. I want to, before we continue with the Kli Yakar, I just want to share something with you for a moment. We're going to scroll down here. I want to bring your attention to a text which some of you might have heard of before, but that's of course something called, I assume not many people have learned it, but that's the text called the Tikkunei Zohar. The Tikkunei Zohar is an addendum to the Zohar itself, which is the main mystical text of the Kabbalah, a remarkable text, and the Tikkunei Zohar is as well. And we're not going to learn the Tikkunei Zohar here together. If you want to learn Tikkunei Zohar, you can speak to David Solomon, our resident expert in the Tikkunei Zohar. He is in the process of actually translating it into English, and it'll soon be up on Sefaria, please God. But the Tikkunei Zohar, I just want you to be familiar with this. It is a multitude of interpretations simply on Bereishit bara Elokim. Whereas the Zohar goes through every parsha, except for a few, but it goes through every parsha and it takes all these different ideas and phrases and develops them into this whole wild world. The Tikkunei Zohar does a similar thing, but it is just focusing on Bereishit bara Elokim. And over again, I see here Bereishit. If you look here, it says Bet Reishit with two beginnings. And it does all these different, or instead of Bet Reishit, it says Barashit. God created six. And over again, it does all of these wild interpretations simply on this idea of Bereishit bara Elokim. And I just thought it's appropriate to just kind of bring that to our attention, just so you know what's going on. Clearly, there's something very, very deep being communicated in this Bereishit bara Elokim. The way in which those words are written contain within them some of the most powerful secrets that our entire religion is founded upon. Okay, but that's not what we're going to focus on here. We're going to jump back into the text. He says here, so remember we've spoken about these different kind of ways of understanding God, if you will, of coming to know God through God's creation and through Am Yisrael and through the Torah. Okay, but he says here the same. He says in a different way. V'yesh od derech shlishi, but there is also a third way to know about the existence of God. Aval ein kol adam yachol la'amod alav, but not everybody is capable of it. V'hu lahakir mitziut Hashem yitbarach mitoch hachakira v'yidiat kol hanimtzaim shebechol shlosha olamot. He says this is to come to know about the existence of God, may he be blessed, through investigation and knowledge of all that is to be found in all of the three worlds, and this is their order. We'll get back to that in a second. So he's going to talk about the order of the three worlds. Mitchilat tzarich hachoker litbonen b'mehut hanimtzaim shebeolam hatachton. At first, the researcher, the one who is seeking out God, must understand the essence of things in the lowest world. Kihi hachakira hakala shebaolam. This is the easiest research that exists, right? It's to come to understand, see God through this world. ואחר ידיעת מהותם יתבונן גם במהות הנבראים שבעולם האמצעי. And after knowing their essence, he should seek to understand the essence of the creatures of the middle world. This should be quite understandable to everybody, I am sure, right? You should come to understand the essence of all things in the middle world. ומשם יעלה דרך סולם השתלשלות המדרגות לידיעת מהות העולם ha'elyon. And from there he should go up, as with the ladder going up to the different levels, to know the essence of the highest world. I'm going to just continue with this, and I was like, what are we talking about here? ומשם יעלה לידע ולהשיג כי יש אלוקה נמצא רוכב על כולם, אשר סדרם על זה האופן כמראה אשר רעם יעקב בארבע שלילות הסולם שהיה מוצב ארצה, היינו השגת העולם התחתון. So he says, and from there, a person should go up to know and fathom that there is a God who is found to ride upon all of them, meaning we have these three lower worlds, and then on top of that, there is a God who is above all of that, who literally, the language that's used is he rides upon all of them, wild, who arranged them in this fashion, like the vision that Yaakov saw in the four rungs of the ladder. So Yaakov has these visions of four rungs. What's the vision? He's talking about four worlds. In the four rungs of the ladder, which was positioned on the ground, which represents comprehension of the lower world. V'rosho magia shamayma. And when it's the pasuk, if you remember, when it talks about Yaakov, he has this wild dream at Har HaMoriah. It says, Sulam mutzav arza. There was a ladder that was resting on the ground, meaning he comprehended and understood the lower world, Yaakov. Then the text continues and says, V'rosho magia hashamayma, and its head reached to the heavens. Zeu ha'olam hatichon. This represents, and its tip reached the sky. This represents the middle world. And then finally the pasuk says, and then the pasuk says, V'hinei malachei Elokim olim v'yordim bo. And it says, and the angels were going up and down it. This represents the top world. V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, and behold, the Lord stood upon it. Ki az hisig al hashlemut mitziat Hashem yitbarach. Then, what does it mean? And behold, the Lord stood upon it. Since then, grasp completely the existence of God. May He be blessed. What the Kli Yakar is bringing, he's talking about this idea that spiritually, mystically, there are these three worlds, and a person is, in theory, like Yaakov, okay, so a person like Yaakov can, in theory, through their spiritual seeking, first experience the godliness in this world, and then experience the godliness in the middle world, and then experience the godliness in the top world, and finally understand how God is above everything. And so there are these three levels and three worlds in which we can understand and experience God. Now, this is a strange concept. Does anybody have any questions on that? I know this is quite wild. You didn't know what you're getting yourselves into. I had quite a wild Simchas Torah, so it's been a bit of a mystical few days. But anybody have any questions on this idea of three worlds? Have you heard that before? Rotem? You're muted there, so I don't know if you're trying to talk. But
Yeah, Rabbi, I have. What's the middle world? I haven't heard the middle world. I heard the Tachton, Malachim, Elyon, and Hashem as the right or above. What's the middle world? Which doesn't explain.
I didn't know either. I'm going to share a source in just a moment, and we'll look at that from a different approach. But the question that I initially had is, some of you, maybe if you've dabbled a little bit in Kabbalah, you might be familiar with four worlds. Have you heard of that before? That there's actually four worlds of creation? Anybody raise your hand if you've heard about the four worlds of creation? No? Okay, wrote them. Thank you. Right. So we're not gonna. I'm not. This is not a Kabbalah class, and I'm not an expert in the Kabbalah whatsoever. But the idea within Kabbalah is that there's 4 levels of creation. We are in the lowest level, in which one certainly can experience God, but it is the most challenging. And so you have the Olam Ha'asiyah, which is the world that we are in. Then there's the Olam HaYitzirah, which is the world of angels. Then there's the Olam HaBriyah, which is a higher level, higher angels, which is more connected to godliness. And then there's a different, but there's Atzilut above that, which is like where God emanates out of. And so the idea is similar to, like, if you think about certain screens that are placed over our experience of reality right now, or we should think about it maybe like, I mean, this is not a great example, but you think about like animals, that animals can hear sounds that we cannot hear. So there's certain levels of perception that we cannot pick up. And so too, we as human beings, there's certain things that we are missing in creation. We can sense this olam ha'asiyah, this physical, structured, solid world. But there are other levels of consciousness beyond that. And so you'll see, again, you'll come across this again, that in the Kabbalah, there is these ideas of traveling through those worlds of consciousness higher up. And so the angels are in the next worlds, but that's where it talks about 4 worlds. And those aren't 4, like, it's not like in a science fiction film of like a world here and then a world there and then a world there. It's not like that. They're not different galaxies. They are rather different levels of consciousness that are happening in this very moment in time, that are always there, that are always happening in this moment. And so it is possible, and that's what the prophets do. The prophets ascend, not to a distant planet, but ascend in their consciousness to the other worlds in this, with even though their body is firmly planted in Olam Ha'asiyah, in the physical lowest world. But here, we actually see this idea of 3 worlds. And so I wasn't familiar with this. It could be that he's talking about that there's 3 worlds and then God is above it, and so that's that highest world. So there's 4 worlds, but he very clearly says 3 worlds. So I did just a very quick search on it. I'll show you what I came up with. And so the suggestion was made that the Kli Yakar here is referencing, if I can find it, is referencing, why do I not have it here? Oh no. I did bring it here. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna, for some reason it didn't save.
I'm Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, co-founder and president of Yeshivat Maharat. And this morning I want to talk about...
I think that Rabbi Hurwitz's share was better than mine, so we'll, I'm gonna share with you 1 second here. So the suggestion was given, I'll just share this screen with you. The suggestion was given that the Kli Yakar is holding on to an interpretation of Rav Yitzchak Albo. Rav Yitzchak Albo, who was a Spanish-born commentator who lived through the Spanish Inquisition, a very significant and significant commentator. He wrote a book called Sefer HaIkarim. And in the Sefer HaIkarim, he speaks about 3 worlds. And so he talks about it differently in a different sort of language than what we're used to. And so if you look here, this is just a source that I found online. And so you see here, reality is split into 3 worlds. The first portion, ha'olam ha'tachton, the lower world, shehu olam ha'yisodot ve'havaya ve'ahefsed, which is the world of foundations and being and lacking. Okay, so meaning it's this world. V'achelak ha'sheni olam hagalgalim, it's the world of planets and interplanetary celestial beings, right? And probably influenced deeply by the philosophy of the Rambam and how he understood how the world was formed. V'achelak ha'shlishi olam ha'malachim, and the third world is the world of the angels. So the suggestion is that when the Kli Yakar talks about these 3 worlds, he is talking about the three worlds communicated here in Rav Yitzchak Albo. Does that fit with everyone? I think that doesn't, because he seems to suggest. Oh no, that does make sense. That does make.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, with me.
It does seem to fit. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to look at the text in the Kli Yakar, because he talks here about the Yaakov. He says, but Malachei Elokim, that makes sense, right? So if you look here, I'll just reference this. I hope I haven't lost everyone. I know this is quite a heady piece of the Kli Yakar. I'm going to finish off with something that's a little bit more maybe accessible in just a moment. But if you look here, when the Kli Yakar references this point about the experience of Yaakov and the four rungs of the ladder, so the bottom rung, the thing sitting on the ground, Sulam Mutzav Arza, that's this lowest world. That's the physical world. That's the perceptible world. Virosho Magia Shamaima, and its head reaching the heavens, that's the middle world. What's the middle world? It's the world of the celestial beings, right? The planets. So it's otherworldly, but it's still part of the physical world. V'hinei malachei Elokim olim v'yordim bo, the angels of God, that's the angelic world, that's the upper world. And so through an understanding of these three things, then you can come to understand God. This is obviously quite a mystical idea that the Kli Yakar brings. And so for that reason, he says the following thing. I'm going to go through this quickly, and then I'm going to hopefully try to bring things back together with something else that I saw today, which I thought was really powerful as well. So let's just finish off the Kli Yakar, this piece. We've got one more paragraph. Omnam derech hakira zo Lo rabim yichakmu lavo besod eloka mitoch heyot adam over be'emek achur haolam hachomri halazeh. However, so he just talked about this idea that I probably lost many of you as we discussed the multiple worlds and coming to understand God through multiple worlds. But he says not many will have the wisdom needed for this approach of investigation to come to the secret of God. Why? As a result of man's passage through this dimmed valley of the material world, right? We're stuck in a physical world. We're stuck with physical material needs that very often get in the way of our spiritual seeking. So not many people just kind of intuitively have the sort of wisdom that allows them to perceive God in this elevated, esoteric sort of way. Al kain, therefore, dai la'adam kishiasig mitziyuto yitbarach mitzad haKabbalah ka'amor umitzad haTorah ka'amor. Therefore, it is enough for a human being to grasp God's existence, may be blessed, from the angle of transmission, right? Meaning what's transmitted from generation to generation, and from the angle and from the perspective of the Torah, as we have mentioned as well. Valzeh amru rabotenu zichronom livracha. Should we do a little bit more here? Just want to make sure I don't. Okay, well, let's do it just because we gotta finish this piece here. I'm gonna move through it somewhat quickly, and I hope we get those people. We get what we get, and then once again, I will try to bring us back down to earth in just a moment. And for this reason, the rabbis said the following thing. שהתחתונים מזכירים שמו יתברך אחרי שתי תיבות, שנאמר שמע Yisrael Hashem. In the Gemara, it says that those people in the lower worlds, the lower ones, when we mention God's name, we do it after two words. We say Shema, Yisrael, Hashem. So the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the holy name of God, is mentioned after two words. Aval ha'elyonim, but the upper ones, Einan mazkirin Hashem ki'im la'achar shlosha tevot. But the the upper ones, meaning the angels, they don't mention the name of God except for after saying three words, shene'emar, as we have said, in something that's well known for us because it is the Kedusha prayer that we say in Shul. If you remember when we used to go to Shul, we say the Kedusha, which mimics the prayers and the statements of the angelic beings. They say, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvakot. So they have three words before they say Hashem. We have two words, Shema Yisrael, and then we say Hashem. Why is that? Why do we say it after two and they say it after three? Lefi she'elyonim koach sichlam zach v'naki. Because the upper ones, the angelic beings, the ability of their intellectual power is pure and clean. And they have the ability, if you remember, he spoke about these three worlds, so these angelic beings, or maybe human beings who are on a higher level, they have the ability to handle the essence of the investigation of these three worlds. They can go to that place. Al Kain, therefore, Einan Rishai Lahazkir Hashem Ki'im Achar Gimel Kedushot. Therefore, the angelic beings, since they can understand God through the lower, the middle, and the upper world, they are not permitted to mention Hashem except for after Kadosh, 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 the three words of Kadosh representing the three worlds. Tahainu shiaskilu tchila b'mahut kol nimtzei mata v'yavinu makom motza'am v'ayidei zeh yakdishuhu yitbarach lemata. Right? That they should first cognate the essence of all those that exist below and understand the place of each, and through the sanctify may he be blessed below. Umisham, right, etc., etc. We kind of understand this, that it's saying basically they need to go through all these three levels. We're going to jump to here. Aval hatachtonim, but the lower ones, the human beings, she'ein sichlam zach, whose consciousness is not so pure necessarily. Kolkach. Ve'ein kol adam yachol la'amod al chakira zu. And not every human being is able to handle this sort of investigation. Ki rabahi, because it's so wondrous, so great. Al kain, therefore, dai lahem lavo lidei hakarat mitziyut Hashem yitbarach achar shtei tevot Shema Yisrael. I mean, this is so powerful, so incredible. I hope we're getting all this because it's so amazing. Therefore, it's enough for the lower ones, for human beings like us, to come to the understanding, the recognition of the existence of God through just the two words of Shema Yisrael. And now look what he brings it all together so beautifully. Ki Shema, what does Shema mean? Hainu lishmoa divrei haTorah hazot hamefarsemet elokuto yitbarach. When we say Shema, we're saying listen to the Masorah, listen to the Torah that expresses the existence of God. Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, Hainu HaKabbalah Shnitpashta b'Yisrael mid Adam Harishon ad Avraham. Shemachriz u'mefarsem elokuto yitbarach. So say Yisrael, which talks about the transmission of the existence of God from when God spoke to Adam Harishon all the way down to Avram, all the way down generation to generation to generation to each and every one of us here in this very moment. So this is a powerful thing. This idea that we have the ability to understand God through the Torah and through Yisrael, through the Torah's wisdom, and also through history and the history of the Jewish people. So I just want to finish up with here. I'm skipping over a little bit, but you guys can. Lekach ne'emar Bereishit bara. Ve'achar kach Elokim. If you remember, his whole question is, why does it say Bereishit bara Elokim? It should have said maybe Elokim bara, or what's going on there, right? What's with this? The remez shloshtan, remaz shloshtan ki Bereishit hainu Yisrael ve'haTorah shenikru Reishit. So the three words Bereishit bara Elokim hint that the following thing. Bereishit hainu Yisrael v'hatorah shenikre'u Reishit. Bereishit, as we explained earlier, relates to the Jewish people and the Torah, which are called Reishit. V'al yidei habriya noda Elokim. And it's through the creation God is made known. V'zehu derech anava shikdim beremez shem shel Yisrael l'shmo yitbarach. So let's see what he's saying there. Since Reishit indicates Israel and the Torah that are both called Reishit, through the creation, God was made known through creation. And this is what it means that God is modest, by which he, in a hint, had the name of Israel precede his name. May he be blessed. So God put in Bereishit, he hinted at the Jewish people. Before God's name, Elokim, is mentioned, in Bereishit it mentions the Jewish people. V'hu be'emet tiferet yikar ugdula liYisrael. And this is in truth glorious splendor and greatness that he gave to Am Yisrael. Al kein ne'emar v'anvatacha tarbeni. If you remember, the Kli Yakar brought this verse that says that it is through your humility that you have made me great. What's the humility that's made us great? The fact that God put the Jewish people first before his name. In Bereishit, God referenced Am Yisrael before his own name to show how great, how amazing Am Yisrael is. The fact that we're mentioned even before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is an incredible thing. V'yesh omrim, let's just finish off. Shanavazu hi ma shenit'asek b'tchila b'tzorchei olamo v'achar kach pirseim shemo yitbarach. And there's some say that God's humility is that he was involved first in the needs of this world, in creating this world, and only after that he publicized his name. Now, this is quite a heady sort of concept, a sort of idea, but it shows you kind of a powerful approach by the Meforshim, where they have this question and they bring everything together and they wrap it up in the end. So just to try to summarize, the Kli Yakar asks, why do we have these different, why is the opening to the Torah so cryptic? Why does it say Bereishit bara Elokim? It could have written that differently. He began to explain that we can understand, experience God just through his creation. You can't understand God without understanding his creation first. But then he says, no, the fact that the word opens with Bereishit, which is a reference to Am Yisrael and the Torah, it comes to teach us that it is enough for us to understand God by learning Torah and by understanding the history and the transmission of the Jewish people that has passed down the idea of God from person to person. Yes, there is a different way of the holy ones who can experience and understand God through the three worlds, like the angels who say Kadosh, 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 but in God's kindness, he gave us the ability. To know him to the best of our abilities, each person according to their own ability, through an exploration of the Torah and Jewish history and the personal transmission of the idea of God. And so while this is quite a complex idea, I think it's a powerful one as we begin learning the Torah together, as we begin this new year, marching through this new year, seeking out God, seeking out connection. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed us with a powerful tool through which we can come to know him, which is the Torah. And each and every one of us has our own chelek. Each and every one of us has our own portion of the Torah. And maybe what I shared with you tonight really spoke to you because you love the complexity of those ideas and how he brings it together. And maybe there's other parts of the Torah that speak to you more. But there is so much there for each and every one of us. And the remarkable thing is that we can, if we are sensitive to and we can experience God speaking to us through the Torah. One thing that really spoke to me a lot over Simchat Torah was the song Torah Hashem Temimah Meshivat Nafesh. The Torah of Hashem is perfect, and it restores the soul. And it was more so this idea of the Torah restoring our souls. And sometimes we're feeling down in the dumps and things are challenging and things are difficult. Learning Torah and learning with an open heart and trying to just do our best has the ability to refresh us and to connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's a lot there. Maybe next week I'll try something that's a little bit less heady, as I said. But I hope that we got a lot out of that, because I think it was a remarkable piece by the Kli Yakar. And again, the idea here is let's jump into some things that maybe we're a little bit out of our comfort zone. Let's learn some things that we haven't learned before. Let's stretch our minds and come to a deeper understanding of ourselves, but also HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts before we wrap things up? I did bring as well, I'm not going to do it now, maybe I'll share Dvar Torah in the newsletter, but a powerful idea from Lahavdil. We're learning Kli Yakar, but I also saw a powerful idea from Jordan Peterson, Lahavdil, which I saw on a blog that somebody shared with me, which is actually a quite incredible idea on Cain and Hevel, about what was going on there in their dynamics. So maybe I'll share that in the newsletter so you can take a look there. But it is just wonderful to be with all of you and for... to just share these moments together and to have some learning. And let's keep coming back. And I'd love to hear what you had to think about this. So you can message me privately. And if it was too much or too little or whatever it is, I'd love to hear that. And next week, please God, we'll keep going and keep delving through the journey of the Torah. Have an awesome evening.
Thank you, Rabbi. I learned two things on a low level. One thing is, just as Shema Yisrael is two words before we get to Hashem, so Bereishit, Bara, Hashem or Elohim, two words before we get to that. That's one thing I learned. And the other thing is, I learned now why we always get all those generations particularly in Bereishit, where they talk about who was the father of whom, etc., 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 in order to get this idea of passing down from mouth to mouth. Thank you.
Beautiful. Love it. Thank you, Roz. Okay, awesome. Shabbat shalom, everybody. I look forward to hopefully
Shabbat shalom.
seeing you
Shalom,
soon.
everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Take care, guys.
Shabbat shalom.